Loaded episode of Dolphins Today by Chat Sports. I am your host, Nic Rohloff. Jalen Ramsey still on the trade block. Is there a new suitor emerging to potentially acquire the All-Pro cornerback? Plus, we'll talk about Dolphins minicamp. There is a player that got highlighted from Mike McDaniel. Today was the final day of minicamp, so now the coaching staff, the front office, the players will go home and then reconvene in a month when it's training camp time. All right, the new suitor for Jalen Ramsey could be the Pittsburgh Steelers. Slick Rick Scoops, who got to give credit where credit's due. He's nailed a lot of things over the past couple of years. He reported just a couple days ago that the Steelers have inquired about Jaire Alexander and Jalen Ramsey, and he expects the Steelers to get one of them, whether it's Ramsey via trade or signing Jaire Alexander. And this raised a lot of eyebrows because he was the first one to hint at Jalen Ramsey being traded. Just a month and a half, 2 months ago, whenever it actually was, he reported that the Dolphins are likely going to trade one of their all-pro players. It was either Tyreek Hill or Jalen Ramsey, and well, here we are. And I find this very interesting because I do believe Slick Rick has a lot of intel around the league, and if the Steelers are interested, that now makes it two players on the Dolphins roster that they might trade. There's only two of them, by the way, Jonnu Smith and Jalen Ramsey, that the Steelers are probably at least the front runner on or one of the destinations. We'll discuss more here in just a second. But this is why you subscribe to the channel, because we put out daily Dolphins coverage. Let's get to 70,400 on today's show. We covered minicamp. We'll continue to break down the Dolphins, the latest news, rumors, and everything in between on the daily. So hit that sub button. Well, as I mentioned, the only landing spot that really has been linked for Jonnu Smith, if the Dolphins end up trading him, are the Pittsburgh Steelers. But now that they're in the mix for Jalen Ramsey, is there a world where the Dolphins trade Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith to Pittsburgh? It certainly is a little bit out there, but it's fascinating to discuss. Now, when you look at the Steelers' cornerback depth chart, you wonder why they would be so in on trading for Jalen Ramsey, if we're going to be honest. They have Joey Porter Jr., who is an emerging star, the second-round pick from a couple of years ago. They signed Darius Slay in NFL free agency. Now, they do not have a legit nickel corner, so talking with Steelers Talk host Jack Sperry, I asked them, hey, if they actually made a trade, would he just play nickel? He would say, yeah, probably, when they usually roll out three corners. If they were in a base defense, it would be either Slay or Ramsey on the outside. But most NFL teams play three corners at all times in this day and age in the NFL, so he would probably still be on the field at all times. He could also rotate in at safety, although they do have Deshaun Elliott and Minkah Fitzpatrick, also two former Miami Dolphins. So maybe the Steelers just have a type of players that played for the Dolphins in the secondary to add to their group. So that's the reasoning Pittsburgh would try to swing in on Jalen Ramsey. But I came up with this idea here. Now, Jack Sperry, when talking to him about it, gave me a hard no, but maybe the Steelers would do this. They've been interested in Jonnu Smith, and now they allegedly have registered interest in Jalen Ramsey. I think Jalen Ramsey's trade value is either a fourth or fifth round pick, but I think I lean towards a fourth at this point, with a lot of teams being interested, like the Rams, like the Falcons, like now the Steelers, and there's other teams involved too. But them also being interested in Jonnu Smith, who's worth a fifth or sixth round pick. If you just package Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith together, could you get up to a second round pick? Say the Steelers want to go all in. They acquire Jonnu to help have more weapons for Aaron Rodgers, who they signed to a one-year deal. You get Jalen Ramsey into that secondary, trying to create a top five defense in football. If the Steelers convince themselves that they could really compete for a Super Bowl this season with Aaron Rodgers at the helm, then I think they would be okay by trading the 55th, 60th pick, somewhere in that range, to get two difference makers, two Pro Bowl caliber guys that can start for them right away. And if you're Miami, I mean, you got to take that deal. If you could get a second-round pick for a player that doesn't want to be on your team in Jalen Ramsey, and one player that's holding out, I just think you have to do it. Now, I would understand that maybe people would think a second-round pick would be too much for both Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith. I understand that. I just think if I'm trading both to one team, why not try to get one really solid draft pick in return? I think I would be even willing to do it for one third-round pick because you'd get a top 100 selection for the two of them going outward. And I would rather have 1 third-round pick than a 4th and a 5th, per se, if you traded them in both separate deals. It's an intriguing hypothetical, which is why I'll ask you this. Would you do this trade? Would you trade Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith to Pittsburgh for a 1 second-round pick? Let me know your thoughts. Today's pinned comment. Type A for accept or type D for decline. I'll take this into another little avenue here before we shift over to Dolphins minicamp. We made a show about this and how the Dolphins could maybe trade Jalen Ramsey for Kyle Pitts. We did that video earlier this week, I believe, or was it the end of last week? I can't recall. But I'll say this. If the Dolphins end up trading Jonnu Smith in a deal with Jalen Ramsey, in a deal by itself, if they get rid of Jonnu, the first thing I am doing is calling up Terry Fontenot and the Atlanta Falcons and trying to acquire Kyle Pitts. And I would be willing to send a third-round pick for Kyle Pitts. And remember, you have 2 third-round picks in this upcoming draft because you got one from the Houston Texans when you traded back in the 4th round. That's why I really liked that deal at the time, by the way. Because Kyle Pitts, a former 4th overall selection, yeah, he's had a declining 3 seasons ever since his stellar rookie campaign. He is a tight end that is a freak athlete, very good with the ball in his hands, and I think would absolutely thrive in the system that Mike McDaniel has. Like, you saw Jonnu Smith have the best seasons of his career. What does Jonnu Smith excel at? Having the ball in his hands after the catch, working the middle of the field, and using his athleticism with that cheat type of motion that Mike McDaniel has. I think Kyle Pitts would absolutely be unlocked in Miami. I really, really do. And if I traded for him, I would like to extend him before the season because I would think he would have a career year and then that price tag would go up a little bit. I don't know if it would happen. There is buzz about the Falcons potentially being open to trading Kyle Pitts. And I'll say it again. If they trade Jonnu Smith, the first thing I am doing is trying to trade for Kyle Pitts. It is not a all-in move now. It is a move that sets you up to be competitive and help your team this year, but also help you in the future as Kyle Pitts is still 24, 25 years old. I would very much like to be in on the Kyle Pitts, I guess, game, if you will, if he is actually available. All right, let's segue now to minicamp. Thursday was the final day of the 3-day program spanning Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And the story of Thursday was all about Cam Smith. Is the third-year corner from South Carolina finally breaking out? Because Mike McDaniel, when speaking to reporters before the practice on Thursday, was very complimentary of Cam Smith through the offseason program in OTAs and minicamp. And this is a good thing if you're Miami, that Mike McDaniel feels good with how he has progressed this offseason because you were relying on him in a very large way. With Jalen Ramsey on the outs, Storm Duck and Cam Smith are right now your top 2 outside corners. That is not something that I feel very good about. I've been very open about that. I think the Dolphins will still sign 1 or 2 corners in free agency. There's no doubt about that. But even if they sign Asante Samuel Jr., which is something that I've wanted Miami to do offseason long, the Dolphins still need Cam Smith in some degree. Because if you sign 1 corner, yeah, that will help one of your outside corner spots, but you still need the other one. Regardless of how you feel about Storm Duck, if he gets hurt, well, you need Cam Smith. And even if Cam Smith and Storm Duck stay healthy, you can rotate those guys in and out and keep them fresh and play the hot hand. So if Cam Smith puts together his best season of his career, which it would not be that hard to do, considering how bad he was as a rookie in terms of not being able to get on the field and how bad his play was on the field last season in that 4-week stretch he got PT, you need Cam Smith to try to bounce back and have the best season of his career to this point. Well, here's the exact quote Mike McDaniel had on Cam Smith, which sparked this entire segment of the show. Cam is in a great spot doing an outstanding job with where we are in the offseason. His key is, how is he going to build on it? And I'll be honest, I'm a little surprised by Mike McDaniel showering Cam Smith with a little bit of praise. Why am I shocked? Well, in the 2 practices at OTAs that beat reporters were there, and then the first 2 days of Dolphins minicamp on Tuesday and Wednesday when reporters were there have not been a lot of mentions of Cam Smith's performance. They have not mentioned him getting really burned outside of one Jalen Waddle deep ball during OTAs. And they really have not mentioned him making plays and stifling wide receivers in their routes during one-on-one. So to hear Mike McDaniel be so complimentary of Cam Smith, it was taken a little back because I would have just expected to see praise from beat reporters on hand watching these practices to pair up with that quote from Mike McDaniel. So it could just be coach speech from Mike trying to hype up and get the fan base feeling a little bit more positively on the third-year corner. Hard to really tell. What is easy to tell is that you got to take advantage of this deal. This Dolphins Aqua hoodie is 50% off. It's on clearance. Usually $75. You can get it for $32 when you go to chatsports.com/Dolphin sale. Sizes are running out. Link is in the description and comments of today's video. Take advantage. Go down or just search chatsports.com/Dolphin sale and you'll find this sweet Dolphins hoodie. Like I said earlier, even if Cam Smith is breaking out and this coaching staff finally feels good about him being a starting corner on this football team and he's able to stay healthy and start the season healthy, you still need to add one or two corners via NFL free agency. The 5 names that we have consistently talked throughout this entire offseason and then the Jaire Alexander news earlier this week, he is now on the list, but the core four, if you will, Asante Samuel Jr., Rasul Douglas, Stephon Gilmore, and Mike Hilton. Rasul Douglas has been a player consistently linked to Miami. He visited Dolphins headquarters. The Dolphins offered him a contract that he rejected. We'll see if those two revisit sides, and we'll see if the Dolphins up their offer and get Rasul Douglas to the 305. We know the Dolphins have checked in on Asante Samuel Jr., but he is not going to sign until earlier mid-July after he has his reevaluation from his doctors after his neck surgery. Gilmore and Hilton are available. Gilmore, I think, might be waiting closer to training camp. Also wants to see what teams need a outside starting corner because I don't think at this point in his career he is in the market of being a backup. So if no other team offers him a starting role for the season, I think Miami could say, hey, Stephon, we might not give you a lot of money, but at least you'll be a starter this upcoming season. And he could be an option for Miami late in the offseason if they miss out on a Douglas Samuel or Jaire Alexander. Same thing I think could be said for Mike Hilton. So you might see a little bit more here when it comes to the cornerback market with Miami. All right, make the call for me, though. Who do you want the Dolphins to sign in NFL free agency when it comes to the cornerback spot? Name your top target for the Dolphins. Let me know your thoughts down below. And when the Dolphins inevitably make moves, whether it is with Jonnu Smith staying here, whether it is trading Jalen Ramsey, or them signing a corner, we will have you covered with a video. Subscribe today and join us for daily content.